banning TikTok. Adults just don't get it. They think it's dumb. I think it's dumb. There's a game of whack-a-mole that's not going to work.
Yeah, for sure. 30 under 30-year sentences. Why so many of Forbes' young heroes face jail.
Did they do this analysis of every age group? I see a linear regression of age versus fraud cases.
Your next job interview could be judged by AI. Here's how to prepare.
Your next job interview will not even give you the dignity of having a human panel assess your competency. The views expressed in this podcast are our own opinions and thoughts. They do not reflect the views of our employers. This episode nearly didn't happen. It's been a busy couple of weeks.
Very busy.
Work-wise, what's been going on?
It's grant writing season. Everything is just crazy at the moment.
There's a very famous episode of Big Bang Theory to us. I think Raj and Sheldon says, it's time to get to work. And they get all really amped up and Eye of the Tiger plays in the background. But just go in the room and stare at a whiteboard. Dun, dun, dun. It's just staring at a whiteboard. So I think it's hard to relate just how much pressure there is involved in grant writing.
There's a lot of data to collate, a lot of collaborators to get on board, maybe get data from them, have them write background information on themselves, and you have to sell yourselves as well. There might be last minute experiments that happen when you realize when you're writing, this would be really good to put in the grant, and then the data's not ready. So there might be some last minute experiments that get done. So it's kind of an all hands on deck approach.
This is the science or scientific grant writing process. We can't speak to the other disciplines in academia that might have a different process.
And it just takes up so much time.
Well, it's very, very competitive, more competitive than ever.
Highly, highly competitive. Most of these grants are really worthwhile of funding, but it's so competitive that only a small fraction, I think, it's less than 10%. It might have been around 8% or something last year.
The sector is not exactly flush with cash at the moment, so everyone's trying to find ways of achieving efficiency and synergies. There's nasty corporate words.
And budget writing going on as well. You have to basically explain why you're asking for the money and break it down.
I guess we are in a white-collar job, and with white-collar jobs, it's hard to say you're physically tired, but certainly it's very mentally draining, right? And it's at these times we wish we had prime energy drinks at our disposal. I've spent the last couple of weeks trying to find prime energy drink, but of course, it's very hard to find.
I've just seen a lot of signs that it's out of stock.
Well, not prime energy, prime hydration even. Just having a little bit of hydration. A little bit of hydration. Just sort out everywhere. We're
a few salts and coconut water.
This is Crossover Connections with Jack Wang. This is a podcast where we talk about science, technology, careers, education, how everything is connected. This is episode 7.
Oh, happy 7th birthday.
We made it to our 7th episode. If it's your first time here, my name is Jack Wang. I'm a professor and a microbiologist based in Australian University.
I'm Amanda and I'm a manager of clinical research.
Together, we have a certain amount of expertise and also a certain amount of bias, if you like. We know our areas pretty well, not well enough in some respects, but as we interrogate the science news headlines, it's actually quite humbling to find that we are a very small sliver of the public consciousness. Not many headlines actually relate to what we're doing.
Very much so. A lot of headlines are super out of field for me.
And if you are a young scientist trying to make a name for yourself in your area of research, odds are your area isn't going to be the thing that's really popular in the media as well. So navigating ways of trying to explain your significance is a really hard exercise, but it aligns with all those future goals of research, with grants, with getting media highlights and exposure in your work. So hopefully this exercise will help us interrogate those skills in a bit more detail. And we like to open every episode now with a recurring segment called The Connect, where we explore previous headlines on earlier episodes of the podcast to touch base on it to see if that area has expanded or progressed a little bit more since the last time we talked about it. And the first article is all about ChatGPT.
ChatGPT is making up fake Guardian articles. Here's how we're responding. It's saying that one of the journalists of The Guardian was contacted by a researcher about an article they had written or supposedly written. It essentially seemed like it was their work, but they could not find a record or a history of it anywhere. They contacted The Guardian and they were asking around, has this been, redacted? Has something happened to it? Can we not find it? But it turns out that the reference was just completely made up, but it was made up in such a way that even the journalist was convinced that it may have been his work. He just couldn't find it or find a record of it.
Wow. And for those of you new to the podcast and new to all the headlines surrounding artificial intelligence has been happening for quite a while, but it's the first one that is able to generate naturalistic human text. That is what scares people more than anything else. If it can talk and sound like a human rather than if it can think like a human but not show you the typical behaviors of a human. So what's The Guardian, which is a news organization, to my understanding, maybe some of their very rigorous reporting is now going to be undermined if one of their fake sources is circulating out there and none of their journalists or editorial team has reviewed it. What's their editorial response to this?
It wouldn't be unique to them, unfortunately, but I think just that they're going to bring in more rigorous processes, right? And make sure they're keeping very detailed records of their articles and what they have written.
Which is hard if you're an online publication, I think, especially if things aren't cached or archived in time. The internet, as much as we think it is eternal, is actually really hard and expensive to maintain. One of the websites that has been a mainstay in the photographic community is called Digital Photography Review, or DP Review. And there's like 20, 30 years worth of people going on these forums talking about different lenses, different cameras, and sample pictures, and all these people posting photos from different cameras over the years. And it's owned by Amazon, and to host this website with all of these images, as you can imagine, is quite a lot of server space.
Huge amount of data.
So Amazon recently decided to can it and say, look, we're just going to cancel this whole website and delete everything. And all these people within the photographic community, we need this educational resource. How will we teach photography? And it was a big campaign. And I think now they're going to say we could keep the archive, quote unquote, indefinitely. But the internet is a hard thing to track things down, believe it or not. When you go back more than 6 to 12 months to 18 months, right? This idea of artificial intelligence making up sources is pretty well known in my area of academia. We've been talking about this idea of AI hallucinations for a while. And what it's doing is using all of the text that it's trained on to predict what a series of words should statistically be connected together in. So you come up with a word, it'll say what's statistically the next word that would most likely come up, and it will just spit out sentences in that way. But if it gets one of these words wrong by a little bit, then the next word statistically is going to be even more astray than the first two, and it can just keep going off this beaten path, and they call it hallucination, where they're just making up fake articles or fake sources to say this study done by 7/7/2015 is a landmark study, and you look it up and it doesn't exist. But it actually takes a lot of work to track that down. And unless you've got a really well-trained eye, which almost no one on the internet has a really well-trained eye in this kind of sourcing, you just get fooled by it, and it's none the wiser, but it's actually very dangerous for us in academia.
Read that there's a source. Sure, you'll often go to the original article. Well, very often it's behind a paywall. You might not be able to access the article to read it in depth, but there's a certain amount of trust if you come across a reference that it's legitimate.
And also, if you're new to reading academic papers, like most students would be, all of them are not written for you. They're written for people that are viewed as experts in the field. So the language, the way it's written is very structured, very formal, steeped in jargon, without understanding how that operates. All of them look and sound the same to you. So it's even easier to pass on these fake sources in front of an untrained eye.
Very true.
Or someone just outside of that discipline area. It's really, really easy to fool people in this space.
I would say even outside the discipline area, like you've said, you know, if it's not my immediate field, there's definitely a certain element of trust when you're reading something you're not super familiar with.
And in our area, again, there's increasing buzz that people are using AI to write their research papers.
Right.
So they give the AI algorithm the data, and then, which is a bit dangerous because we don't know who owns that data then.
No, I wouldn't trust putting any data out there.
It's changing quite a bit as well. Or the journals would use AI editors to vet the text. And so it's an AI versus AI at some point in time. You don't know who trusts who. A very common thing is when you submit papers for review, you have to anonymize it. So it's de-identified.
Yeah.
And then you get reviewers' comments come back, and you also don't know who the reviewers are, ideally. So the reviewers ideally don't know who you are, and then you ideally don't know who the reviewers are. The only one who knows who any of these people are should be the editor. But the editor is an AI algorithm. Then everything can go awry.
Ideally, it's anonymized, but it never is really, because even if it were, it's easy to predict.
Well, in our area,
based on the field and the subject matter, yeah.
At least in our fields, there's
It would
usually
be ideal, but often not so.
usually a handful of experts at a certain level that can judge the merit of a work, certainly the high profile
Yep,
work.
that's right.
But what's ironic was I saw a thread on Twitter. Reviewer 2 said, you did not interpret the work of so-and-so et al. 2015 correctly. You clearly misinterpreted it. This is a very, very big flaw in your understanding of the field. And of course, the
Guess who
author...
reviewer 2 was.
There is that. Reviewer 2 could be talking about their own work.
Yeah, I think so.
But ironically, Reviewer 2 was talking about a paper published by that author in 2015.
Oh, no, really?
So they were accusing the author of misinterpreting their own work.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So again, is it that reviewer legitimately misinterpreted the author's interpretation of their misinterpretation?
Too many loops.
Or is that Reviewer 2 is AI and it was trying to interpret... This is in the weeds about this.
I'm just going to have that in the back of my mind. If anything that's critical, maybe it was just AI.
Yeah, you don't even understand your own work. You're this bad, you don't even understand your own work. So this is a very quickly moving space.
Yeah.
The next article in The Connect is relating to agricultural crime, a story of agricultural whodunit based in Australia.
And it's not about bats.
It's not about bats.
Not about bats. New technology could be used to prevent and reduce agricultural crime in Australia.
When we talk about research, there's always a problem at the heart of it. The hero's journey has to begin with an inciting, tragic incident. You have to pitch yourself as the hero who can swoop in to save the world from an existential crisis.
True.
And the number that I'd like to bandy here is $50 million. Now, that number might sound familiar because this was the same number bandied about for bats causing, not bats causing wine spoilage.
Sorry,
but
don't vilify the bats.
No. We're falling into our familiar loop of vilifying bats. The previous article we read was bats could be a solution to wine spoilage because they could eat the insects, is that right? Or eat the moths? They could eat the moths.
That destroy the grapevines.
The grapevines, which was also described as a $50 million a year problem. 50 million. So it's a nice round number, it seems.
It is.
And so the problem here that we're talking about agricultural crime is the theft of cattle or sheep or livestock. Apparently it's a rampant problem. I had no idea. $50 million.
I had no idea either. And apparently it's a quite common problem. And if you think about it, this would have to be a very well orchestrated operation to steal a bunch of livestock. I mean, it's not...
Surely there's nowhere to hide. I mean...
The problem is that they're on such large properties, so you might just not know until you muster them together and suddenly you've got a whole bunch less than you thought you did. Yeah, it'd have to be a very well-orchestrated crime, so
yes,
must be someone in the know.
Neither of us are mastermind criminals, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here. We'd have better things to do with our time.
Got a bunch of cattle in the backyard right now.
Yeah, neither of us are guilty of this crime. First of all, we're not guilty of stealing...
We're not guilty. No.
Of stealing any cows. But if we were to come up with a solution to this problem...
I would have thought that maybe they were microchipped for some kind of GPS tracking, but apparently according to this article it's not so common. Because traditionally they were branded, weren't they?
Shave their fur in a very distinctive way, maybe give them haircuts or bleach it. I don't really know, but surely some kind of labeling of these of this livestock might help limit the extent of the problem. But if they can move them over vast geographical distances, then all this seems a bit moot. Proposed solution here is to do with facial recognition software and the underlying artificial intelligence processes that might help and speed up the recognition. The claim here is that the nose of a cow is visually distinctive or as distinctive as a human fingerprint.
Okay.
So if you could train a database on all the cow noses you can think of, kind of a really weird database to have on your computers, just the millions and millions of cows' nose, and that's a registry, and like Face ID in our phones, you can put it in the app and just scan the cow's nose to see if they are one of your own.
Yep.
Or if they belong to someone else, perhaps coupled with a geotagging solution. Very rarely is one solution going to be enough to fix it. That might help deter, maybe not prevent, but maybe deter the people who are thinking of theft to say, look, do I give them a nose job? Or do I need to give all these cows nose job? All of a sudden I have to factor in the cows and the milk and then the nose job cost. Maybe it's not worth my while anymore.
My time to orchestrate this very sophisticated.
Have to become very good at rhinoplasty and cow rhinoplasty, and got to factor that into my budget.
Finally, my vet degree is coming.
To medical school, vet school. It's not worth it anymore. The calculus of the crime is now changed.
We're just doing the same with the GPS tracker. You can look at if a bunch of cows are outside the area they should be in, or a bunch of cows are suddenly moving at once in the same direction. It's a little bit suspicious.
The main reason I would talk about this article was not because of cow nose jobs, but because we see a lot of this type of article in the news, in the science news, a lot of agricultural science, a lot of outback science, or science that impacts people in more rural areas of our countries. And I think this is true across other countries reporting on science as well. And again, it's quite separate from the kind of work we do, which is
Very much so.
more zoomed in on that level of life, which is within test tubes or in cells, is within a traditional makeup of a lab that you might think of on TV or see on TV. So this is quite interesting in the exercise that we're embarking on, because we don't often talk enough about the translational impact of our work outside of the laboratory environment. If you can find a connection from your work to something that impacts people in a broader community sense, that is the secret sauce that is actually really, really difficult to do from a scientific perspective.
Yeah.
I was at a conference and I spoke to a lot of people who work as media liaisons. Right? This is a conference in Canberra. So their job is to talk to the media and liaise between academics and media. And all of them came up with the same problem pretty much, to say science is one of the hardest things to talk about. Every science story is crazily different from a previous science story. We can't have a template that will make every science story as appealing. It's just a really tricky proposition. And this researcher has found a way of connecting his AI, agricultural, facial recognition, cow nose recognition thing,
For him.
parlay into something that's a $50 million a year problem. I think that's great. And we can learn more from this kind of approach.
Very unique niche, isn't it?
Moving on to the next series of articles is a new segment that I'm calling The Circuit, which is all about the headlines that appealed to our interests and our overlapping thoughts over the last few weeks. And I'm going to give you a series of headlines pretty quickly now, and I want just your gut response to them.
Okay.
First article, Spotify abandoned something called Heardle. Have you heard of Heardle?
No.
And Heardle here, for those listeners, is spelled Heardle. Heardle. You've never heard of Heardle before?
No. And look, it's only looking at how it's spelled that maybe gives a slight indication as to what it's about, because my initial thought is just the sport. Hurdling. Right?
Hurdling. Have you heard of hurdling? Well, of course. I'm not a fool, Jack. I've heard of hurdling before. Heardle is the play on Wordle, which took the world by storm during the pandemic. It's solving for words. You're given a certain number of tries. Everyone globally has the same word, and everyone likes to stunt on other people to say, I got it in the first go, the second go.
And look, when it first came out and people were bragging about how fast they had solved it, I had no idea. It's just a bunch of colored boxes. Okay, great.
But it took the world by storm. It was an adult version of a guilty pleasure that, again, they would play on their phones. Heardle was an attempt at this, and they were an independent game where they played a piece of music bit by bit until you guessed what the song was.
Okay, sounds kind of fun.
You should know what the song is after you hear the whole song, but you still might not know what it is. But if you can guess it earlier on into the song, you get a higher score.
Okay. Do you remember that radio segment that used to occur where they would play a brief sound clip of something and you had to guess what it was? And it was really obscure, like opening a bottle of whiteout or something like that.
Yeah. It's a concept that's very popular across the world. Like, guess the sound or play that sound. It's not just Australian. It's not just an Australian context thing. It was actually on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I think Holt had to guess what the sound was with Charles. And it's a concept that is clearly very, very common in radio segments.
Yeah.
Radio producers apparently have run out of ideas or have the same idea across the globe. So this kind of game is very similar to that. But what's happened is that it's terminated. Spotify has said, well, we are not supporting this beyond a certain date, beyond May the 5th, I believe. So if you're really, really keen fan of Heardle, or if it's your first time hearing of Heardle and you want to see if you can give them a boost in the arm, then you've got until May the 5th to have a play of it. But this is the danger with any kind of game that is more suited for grown-ups. You never really know what's going to hit. Wordle probably retrospectively seems very daggy, very nerdy.
Yeah.
Like, why would you spend all this time playing it? And probably even the makers of Wordle are trying to figure out how to reignite the success they had. You never really know what's going to hit, especially when it's to do with adults.
Yeah.
And people who invest in entertainment are not dummies. They are usually very, very savvy people who want to get a return on investment. So when it comes to investing in entertainment, there is one reliable demo that again delivers for you if you invest and you give them what they want. And that demo is, of course, young people. Super Mario Brothers, which was made into a movie, an anime movie that came out the last couple of weeks. And it's made how much money so far?
It's not 50 million, is it?
No, it hasn't made 50. If it made 50 million, it would be a tragedy because the budget would way eclipse that. It's made 500 million.
500 million, yeah. I figured it was more, but...
It's,
That
it's
was
like
definitely
it's
a
like the
50
Austin
million.
Powers clip where Dr. Evil comes back and says $1 million.
50 million.
I want to ask for a ransom from a whole
Again, we're
country
showing our age.
of $1 million. So it's made $500 million
Yeah.
globally only after a couple of weeks, and
Okay,
it's
yeah.
slated and on par and on pace to beat out all these other animated films. It's not become one of the biggest releases of the year, and there's lots of reasons as to why you could argue it's successful, whether it works as a cinematic feature. Finally, a good video game adaptation, because lots of video games have attempted to be made into movies, and almost all of them have failed. Tomb Raider, there is
Tomb Raider, okay,
Assassin's Creed, Warcraft, I
But this
think.
one's fully animated, right? So
It is fully animated. My argument for why this is the most popular is that, yeah, it's targeted for kids. A lot of the other video game movies are kind of this young adult, you know,
Right,
because
yeah.
they can be a bit
Tricky.
violent, and the filmmaker come in and say, I want to do a gritty adaptation. I want to make them seem like really cinematic and show
Yeah.
the dark side of. Whereas Mario is Mario. I'm not to say there's no depth to Mario, but it's like really
Mario is
firmly
great.
really firmly targeted for kids. And if they did it well, which they clearly did on some respect, they made a ton of money.
Yes.
Right. So when you're looking for entertainment, you want to hit the demo that will want to nag their parents to go buy the money, and you hopefully want the parents to also have nostalgia about their childhood.
Absolutely. I'd like to see what demographic is. It's probably perfectly targeted because a lot of parents would be in the era where they grew up with Super Mario, so it would appeal to both the parent and the child.
I think if you are in high school now, if you're 18, 19, that's probably the demo that's missing it. I think they didn't really grow up around Super
Yeah,
Mario.
that's right.
And if you search out in ChatGPT, what is the most famous video game that most people would have heard of? It's this Super Mario Bros.
yeah.
It's sold 40 million copies. It's been around since the 80s.
I mean, yeah, most of our generation could probably sing you the little theme song, right?
Yeah, the sound effects, all that kind of stuff, right? Not to say that this is a property that will guarantee print money, because they did try and make a live action movie of it previously. It wasn't animated, and it was dubbed one of the worst movies ever made. The live action version in the
I'm
90s.
curious to see what else is on that list.
Well, it's all subjective. It's art, right? But this made a ton of money. The thesis I'm going to present to you is that kids and young people, millennials, however you want to classify them, they are simultaneously relied upon for the economic engine of society. And they're also the scapegoat for every single time something remotely bad happens or something remotely alarming. We try and blame young people, and we try and put all these restrictions, regulations to make their lives harder, because we think they are the problem and not the solution. That's my thesis for you. It's never been harder to be a young person. And I say that as someone who still likes to think I'm relatively young-spirited.
Yes, okay.
But I acknowledge my path is nowhere near as tricky as theirs is
That's true.
to come. I don't want to be a pessimist on this platform. I like to provide some optimistic solutions, which we'll hope to get to towards the end. But there's a bit of pessimism up front before we get to that point, because the next series of headlines all around the ways that the world has tried to blame young people for things and put limitations on what they are able to do in their as of yet quite young lives. The first headline is around Juul.
Juul to pay $462 million to 6 states in its largest settlement ever.
Almost $500 million US in settlement. And Juul, for those of us who aren't aware, is of course a company that does many things, but their claim to fame is electronic cigarettes or vaping.
Vapes, yeah.
Or e-cigarettes. Juul is accused not of selling this product to teenagers. They're guilty of marketing their product
Right, yeah.
deliberately and specifically for young people.
Yes.
That's a huge settlement, $500 million for the settlement. And we see millions of middle and high school students in the US smoking e-cigarettes in 2022. And of course, there's a number of vaping related illnesses that are associated with vaping and e-cigarettes. What's so bad about vaping, and how is it different to normal cigarettes? From my understanding, the vape is just a bit of vapor. It could be a lot of different things. It could be juice. It could be candy. It could be alcohol. It could be nicotine. Nicotine being the most common variant to my understanding.
Yeah.
It could be marijuana as well. So it could be all sorts of things in this vape pen. But at the end of the day, it forms a little bit of a vapor, and you kind of look cool, I guess, smoking. But what it doesn't seem to have is the tobacco. So it doesn't seem to have the tobacco, which people typically associate with tobacco stains and kind of that breath and the bad teeth and maybe the respiratory risk of lung cancer.
More dirty association.
Yeah,
it's kind of marketed as sort of a cleaner
product,
isn't it?
But it still has the agent that keeps people coming back, which is not just looking cool. It's
absolutely, yeah.
nicotine. And nicotine has a biological mechanism and impact on everyone, not just young people. What does it do to the brain?
It acts through nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. So back to the receptor biology. Something's binding to a receptor, it's causing a downstream change, and the ultimate effect of that is that you're having a dopamine release, essentially. It's addictive.
Dopamine is one of the pleasure responses in the brain. So it's telling your brain, hey, this is good in some capacity. And anything that triggers a dopamine responses will have the potential to invite you back.
Yeah. Addictive. Its effect will sort of lessen over time. You'll be taking in more, usually becoming addicted and having withdrawal symptoms when you're not using it.
This is not unique to young people.
No.
Anyone can be addicted to anything, certainly if it triggers the dopamine receptors in your brain. But you could argue young people, their brains aren't fully formed, which is, again, very paternalistic and quite condescending.
It is, isn't it?
But
Yeah,
if their
it's
neural
true,
pathways aren't fully mapped out and they're doing these things that might incur this addictive behaviors and habits, that might not be a good idea for the long term.
I think, the danger is that there's a lot of other chemicals that are in these vapes, and people are just starting to see the downstream effects that can cause due to the increase in popularity. So it's a large unknown, and it's risky.
This maybe is a good example of an appropriate level of caution, right? Where this product is dangerous for everyone, but if it's catching fire in the younger community, then maybe it does need to be more heavily regulated. The next one is even more in the gray area. And this is an Australian specific headline where we're talking about banning phones.
Okay. In schools.
In schools. And this is an Australian story. So our education minister has come out to say we need Australia countrywide approach in consistently when and when not to ban phones in schools.
How old were you when you got your first mobile phone?
I was the first year university, so first year in college.
Right, and I think I was 15 or 16.
Okay, a little earlier.
Yeah, and I remember I had this phone that had this blue background screen. I thought it was so great. Snake was a popular game.
Nokia. Everyone had the Nokias for a while. Yeah, and it was great because it was very affordable.
Yeah, I think some teenagers brought them to class. I think mine was just in my locker at school most of the time. Now your phone's on your person all the time, right?
Yeah, all the cool kids had phones in high school. I didn't get mine until uni. I think the idea of using your phones at school is obviously counterproductive to learning.
Obviously.
Unless you want the students to use their phones to do some kind of activity. Yeah, so you shouldn't really be using your phones in class. Banning something often makes it seem more exciting. People trying to ban AI in schools, I think they're seeing a similar curiosity from young people say, well, they're banning it. They must be banning it because it's too good. So what is it about? Actually promotes people to use it and find out more about it in their own time. If you ban alcohol traditionally, has had a very bad effect on society. I think the right kind of ban, the right kind of situation obviously is very effective and necessary, but this is yet another instance where young people aren't the only ones that are stuck on their phones, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I spend way too much time on my phone.
I do too.
Monitoring all the analytics for all the stuff that we post on podcasts and the YouTube channel, all the kind of stuff. But just generally speaking, it's not a good thing. I always feel worse. I've got a lot of chronic shoulder and neck pain. I'm not a young person.
Issues.
Yeah, it's not a good thing. How much time do you think you spend on your phone a day?
I don't want to know.
You don't want to know?
A few hours, maybe.
A few hours. So more than 2 hours, let's say.
Yes, definitely.
More than 3 hours?
Probably.
More than 4 hours?
How much time do you think you spend on your phone a day?
I think it's in the 3 hour ballpark.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can check the stats. If you really want to, you can check.
I turn that off.
But I'm on a computer for work, right?
Yes.
But even that's a different kind of sitting position. It's a little different in the economics of it.
I very rarely use it at work. At home, I use it a lot more. So like at night time and
So we're not throwing stones while living in glass houses, I guess, is what I'm cautioning against. Everyone is using their phone all the time.
Yeah.
And especially if you're an adult in any kind of work environment where you need to respond to queries quickly or you're traveling for work, everyone's on their phones constantly, maybe for more nefarious reasons than young people are using their phones for. But we don't treat the problem more broadly. We target the kids.
And I mean, it's such an integrated part of our work life too. I mean, a lot of it is checking emails and doing work.
And you can't even order food at a restaurant without a phone these days. You
That's
can't
right,
just
yeah,
have
you
a
have to
menu
scan
and
a
then
QR
tell
code, yeah.
someone I want this. You got to scan a QR code and sign up for 4 accounts and
Yeah.
then go into the app to pay for using another one of 4
And
accounts.
we go, oh, great, I don't have to talk to a waiter.
So no, just this was it would have been so much quicker. You're making the experience worse.
Yeah.
This is
Actually, I think it's better because no one will get my order wrong.
yeah, they will. What are you talking about? They're totally going to get your order wrong. Someone has to read
They
it off
may
the screen.
interpret it incorrectly, but it's not at the waiter end.
They still have to read the thing off the screen. And reading is a lost art
Yeah.
in many, many parts of the world. The policy versus perception is what I'm kind of going at. I think policy has its merits, but the perception is, again, hey, you young people, you can't be trusted to do the things that we're doing anyway.
Yeah.
Another article I'm going to throw at you is TikTok.
Okay.
In Australia, in the US, there's talk of banning TikTok. The reasons for that are wide and varied. You could argue it's owned by governments. It has some data security issues potentially. We don't actually know how much data it's accessing behind the scenes. You can make the same argument of Facebook and Instagram and Google. We don't actually know how much of the data, of the metadata from our phones it's scrubbing and using and selling. So we don't actually know. It has caught this flack, I believe, because adults just don't get it. They think it's dumb. I think it's dumb. They watch a TikTok and they go, I don't get why they're dancing and lip syncing and miming.
Right, yeah.
I don't get why it loops. Do I have to watch this more than once? I don't know why
You've extracted all of the useful information.
Why is there always some music I've never heard of going on in the background, but apparently millions of other people have heard of it because it's very famous?
You sound like such a grumpy old man right now.
This is not me. This is a persona of a much older, grumpier person.
Sorry, okay.
It's not me.
All right.
I'm a TikToker. I'm on TikTok. I put videos on TikTok. But I can understand where the confusion comes from.
Yep.
People think it's a young people thing. They think it's a waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh, by the way, there's all these potential security risks and it might be owned by a different country and there could be some geopolitical tension that's arising. This is something we need to ban. Young people love TikTok. That's the oldest thing I've ever said. That's oldest I've ever sounded. There's youngins. It's popular for a reason, okay?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
If you are a music record company, you have to have your artists put their stuff on TikTok. That's where all the young people are. That's where the purchasing power is. It's like purchasing power earlier. Every celebrity is on TikTok for a reason. That's how you drive interest in your products that you want young people to spend money on. You can't ignore it. But because of all these concerns and because of the perception that it's a little dumb, people are trying to say, let's ban TikTok. Aside from maybe the rationale for doing it, let's talk about, will banning TikTok actually have the desired effects that they want it to have, which is to be more data secure, to be more protected. And they can argue, well, it's not a nationwide ban. We're proposing a ban on government devices in case the government officials are getting spied on by different countries.
Shouldn't be on there in the first place.
A government phone should have very, very few things on it, I would argue.
You would think.
You would have no personal stuff on your government phone.
That's right.
There's an article from the conversation that talks about this in detail. Conversation is one of our favorite outlets. And it talks about the effectiveness of banning, well, not just TikTok, but any one app to try and promote cybersecurity. And it basically says it's a game of whack-a-mole that's not going to work.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree.
What is the article proposing would be a better solution?
Educating people on digital security and foreign interference, streamline reporting channels for data breaches, recommending use of appropriate standards on cybersecurity, strengthening cooperation between government and platforms and civil society, targeted prohibitions, which may include bans on apps that could share data with countries that might use it for foreign interference.
So you could ban some apps, maybe TikTok, maybe the biggest app on the planet is one that you want to ban. But overall, it's the social aspect around cybersecurity, not the actual technology itself.
That's how people are getting in. Right? It's always some kind of third party something. It's not through some kind of sophisticated hack, usually, is it? Well, I mean, it could be. It's sophisticated.
It can and it could be.
Yeah.
And the tagline is it's not if but when people will get in if they really want to get into your systems.
Yeah, that's right.
There are these hackathons that people just hire the best hackers in the world to try and get into a commercial system, and the person who gets in first gets a big prize or gets a government contract.
Yeah.
So people with the skills will be able to get in.
Yeah.
And the people who are able to get in, though, don't have to rely on the highest of skill sets. And there's a very famous and accurate depiction of the whole hacking enterprise in a series, Mr. Robot. It's one of my favorite series I've seen recently. It's called Social Engineering. It's very innocuous cause. Can you just remind me what what my puppy's name was, like they call up a pet service, and then the dog's name, of course, is the first prompt for the security thing. Or, oh yeah, I'm just calling up to check the date of birth of my mother-in-law or something like that, like oh yeah, I think my mother-in-law lost her wallet and we're just gonna. So it's just that these like innocuous human loopholes that they can extract, and we can't fully protect against that. It's not a numerical computational problem, it's a human problem.
Absolutely.
And the phishing with a PH is well known, you would think, but it's still so effective.
Yeah.
Did you know Amazon has tried to deliver 10 parcels to your place of residence in the last 10 minutes, and if you don't, we're going to charge you $90 to your credit card. Please click on this link.
It's upsetting.
Or Post Office or FedEx tried to drop something off earlier, but to get in, they'll need your access code. Can you do that? It's so pervasive.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's just a human connection.
It's very convincing looking.
So instead of blaming the youngins and their TikToking and their TikTokery, for putting us at a vulnerable cybersecurity position as a country, we should take a hard, long look at our own cybersecurity policy, because what else has happened of late? We've had data hacks.
A number of data hacks, yes. Lots and lots and lots.
In Australia, just to name a few, there is Latitude, GE Money, Coles My Credit Cards, Medibank, which is the biggest private health insurer in Australia, Optus, the biggest or second biggest telecom provider in Australia, Woolworths, biggest or second biggest supermarket chain in Australia. All of them have been hacked. And all of them have been hacked precisely because they are the biggest or second biggest vendors in this space. You could argue, surely one of these has got a good cybersecurity policy or cybersecurity defense. Surely none of them would be this bad. But one by one, they fall because not because of the policy or their protective measures, but probably because they are the biggest and the second biggest.
And often in the reports, it's like, sophisticated operation, but it's through a third-party username where someone had access to some system, and that's how they've gotten in.
So instead of doing the hard work in trying to revamp these systems and improve public awareness and have greater transparency, let's blame the TikTokery, blame the kids.
Publications in our field, you need to pay a fee to publish your work. That's being targeted by a lot of phishing emails that say things like, "Dear esteemed professor, we recently read your article with interest, copy and paste something in. Would you like to publish in our journal on?"
I get a lot of these emails.
I found recently they've changed their tact a little bit. So it used to be, "Dear esteemed professor, we hope you've been well." Like, "Oh, okay, thank you very much. That's very nice of you to ask." But now it's more taking the tact of, "We have tried to contact you multiple times and you haven't responded. Please respond to our email. We've invited you." Yeah, that's right. To see if that tact will
They're trying to play hardball. Maybe I did miss the email. What's going on?
They're very angry.
They're very angry at me. I don't know what I've done.
What did I do?
I don't think this is a good phishing scam, because the number of people willing to publish in a very specific area and pay a fee to do that is exceedingly small slice of the population. So if you're trying to do social engineering based on being named an esteemed professor, that's actually a pretty small slice of the population. It probably would be very high click-through rate for people in our field, but hey, they learn from the best. If they see a strategy is working, why not co-opt it? Maybe we should start co-opting this.
Think of a niche market.
And speaking of scammery and skullduggery, that brings us to this week's Whose Job Is It Anyway? Our recurring section and segment of the podcast, which talks about the latest headlines relating to jobs and employability. And this is a bit of a sobering headline again, connected to the whole theme of this episode, which is the blame we disproportionately place on the younger generation. And this article is all about the Forbes list of young heroes.
30 under 30-year sentences. Why so many of Forbes' young heroes face jail.
This article goes through and lists a who's who of very promising young entrepreneurs that was listed in this Forbes 30 under 30 list. Do they do this analysis of every age group? Is it just Forbes?
Why? Yeah.
Are just entrepreneurs more likely to be guilty of fraud, not just people who are young? What happened like the 40 under 40, the 50 under...
Where's the cutoff?
I want to see a covariate analysis.
31, no.
I want to see a linear regression of age versus fraud cases to see if really young people
I really want to see
are actually more guilty of fraud than the older people. So again, I think this is a flawed premise. But certainly the most high profile of fraud cases seems to be falling in the lap of these young people. So it goes through and names a few of them. I won't go through all of their particular cases. Charlie Jarvis, she's 31. And there's a criminal charge associated with her basically inflating the number of active users of her platform, which I believe is a higher education.
Which led to more investment.
Yes.
Yep.
If they say 1 million people use it, but there's only 100,000, then that's fraud. Another famous example is the guy behind cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency service provider, if you want to say broadly, FTX. And they lost tens of billions worth of people's investments. And the person at the center of it is a young man who's also on this 30 under 30 list, Sam Bankman-Fried, and they call him SBF on Twitter, right?
SBF.
It's that
He's
hip
got
and
his
habit. He's got his own
acronym.
SBF.
Wow.
Not SPF, SBF. To understand the nature of this fraud, you kind of had to understand crypto and cryptocurrency. Do you know much about Bitcoin, about crypto, anything in that space?
Not at all.
Not at all. So when you hear that there's fraud in this space, does that innately make sense to you? Did it always seem like it was a little fishy, or were you just
I just go, oh, okay, fraud with crypto, sure.
Okay,
Makes sense.
that does make sense. I'm not an expert in this.
Yeah.
This is my attempt at getting more clicks because people love nothing more online than to criticize people who criticize crypto. Okay, everyone online is a big advocate for crypto.
I'm not criticizing it. I'm just completely ignorant.
Okay. So this segment, I'm going to splice out to try and get more clicks and views for people saying we are criticizing crypto without understanding anything. This
I'm
is
not
my
criticizing it. I am just jealous that I do not understand it better.
This is my attempt at explaining what it is to you,
please
right?
explain.
So if those of you who want to TikTok this segment to say I know nothing, please go ahead. Crypto is not about what you buy with your real world money because it's an investment. You invest in an online digital asset.
Okay. Yes.
What you end up buying looks very silly. Like anything you buy online looks potentially silly if it's not a physical product you have in your hand. So often people end up buying a JPEG, a picture of a monkey, often pictures of pictures or something. It's something that doesn't seem like it's worth anything.
Okay.
It is the receipt that you've bought something.
Okay.
This is confirmation that your funds have been transferred to this object.
Okay. Yes.
Whereas if we do online transactions, if we move money from our banking account to another banking account, that transaction is legitimized just through the bank.
Yeah.
That gets hacked, then who knows what happens, unless your country has got security and insurance underwriting every transaction, which is typically the case. So the receipt of what you've bought online is the key here, and that is protected by security protocols. Anyway, that's as much as we're going to get into it. So again, it's all about investing in something where you can prove that your money is going in this direction. End game of crypto is to make more money. There is no other altruistic or other physical world impacts. Just money begets money. There's no other impact beyond money on money on money, which makes a lot of sense if you're an investor. But to us in this kind of space where we are always running operations that come through at a loss to do projects that people either don't fund or don't care about, the idea that we'd just use this to make more money, which can only be used to make more money, just seems out of our operating
It's a
frame
strange
of
concept.
reference, isn't it?
I'm actually just thinking now this would be a great ChatGPT prompt for me to just go.
What is-
explain cryptocurrency to me like I am 5 years old.
Yes. I think we will need to. And
Let's go with 12. Let's go.
no, let's go with 5. Based on this, let's go with 5. as well.
I am offended.
You're offended. To get people to invest, often you say, well, yes, of course you'll make money. But there's also this other intangible element to why you want to invest, this emotional aspect. Whereas this is purely fiscal. It's just like if you invest, you will get more money. There's no other part to it. Very famous recent case of a young person being accused of crimes. His collaborator or co-worker, Ellison, also is facing 110 years worth of jail. 110 years worth of jail as a young person. Martin Shkreli or Farmer Bro. He's another person who's made this list previously in 2012. Guilty of raising the price of the drug Daraprim, which is an anti-parasitic drug that many people use, from $17.50 US, $17.50 to $750 US. My math isn't great, but that's at least a few 100% increase
It's a lot.
in price. So he became famous for this. And he was skewed in all these congressional hearings, and he didn't seem to care, and he made a lot of money as a result of this, and he went to jail, and now he's back in the news because he was basically banned from ever working in the pharmaceutical industry again, and now he's back. Elizabeth Holmes, founder of Theranos, the company that said a drop of blood will let you do 1 million blood tests, which I wish was true, but clearly
Really
isn't.
about that a lot, yes.
A lot from just one single blood drop. Also, Trevor Milton, who was, I guess, a failed version of Tesla. He was at the helm of an electric truck maker company.
Nikola Motor. Okay.
Nikola Motor, I think instead of Tesla's Nikola Tesla, I think that's the play on
right.
words,
Of course,
right? Trying to be a competitor to
yeah.
Tesla. And what is his claim to fame?
I had a laugh when I read this. The article says, perhaps most notably, Nikola made a demo video showing its non-functional truck rolling downhill, but tilted the camera to make it look like it was traveling under its own power on a flat road.
Through that young-minded ingenuity,
Genius
from the TikTok moving the phone, he
but
knew that
hey, it worked, right?
it works. So if Amanda is sitting perfectly still and I just tilt the camera in post, I can make it seem like she's gradually moving from one part of the screen to the other part of the screen.
Gradually exiting the room.
Through post-production wizardry, it is very easy apparently to fake. You need a good set of values underlying it, I guess. Like faking has never been easier, right? Now with AI, now with all this imagery, it comes down to the morality and the integrity down the lines of all these young entrepreneurs. You want to see a linear regression of age versus number of fraud cases accused of. If you're going to go down this lane to say young people are particularly guilty of fraud, but they do point out this dilemma that we've been trying to articulate in a number of ways in this episode, which is young people are under more pressure than they've ever been under. We have a relative amount of success between the two of us in our relative fields. I think if you want a person who is just entering our fields now to get into our current positions, I honestly don't know what I would tell them, because I think that door is very, very narrow to get into any competitive position in our field. And I don't think if they just did what I did, they would be able to get to my position. I just don't think that's available to them anymore. It's become more and
The
more.
climate keeps changing, right?
Keeps changing, it becomes more competitive. And what this article was saying is that there is fetishization of youth, and this 30 under 30 list puts pressure that you have to achieve great things while you're still under 30 or you've wasted your life. And that pressure may amount to a corruption of the morality or a deprioritization of the integrity that you need to do something that doesn't get you thrown in jail.
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, I had finished my PhD not that long before 30, so a few years prior.
And I tell my students all the time, there's nothing positive about being young in science. Nothing positive at all. You get disrespected as a young scientist consistently because no one trusts young people. We've talked about this.
They think you don't have age on your side.
I can't tell you the number of times I've been shushed after one of my classes by the next professor coming in because they think I'm a student that's taking up space. They think, oh, you're a young person. What are you doing in my grill? Get out of here. And so I've been dismissed so many times because of my age, even though I'm pretty well educated and have an authority on a number of topics. But people just don't take young people seriously in rather more formal, rigorous professions like academia, like many of the other professions out there. Don't be in a rush to get to where you need to go, but have a plan for your next 5 years. If you've got a 5-year plan, that's better than most people.
Absolutely.
Which brings me to crossover of the week. My attempt at trying to rally us home and have a more positive tilt on how young people
let's go.
should navigate this environment. But it does begin with a sobering headline again.
Your next job interview could be judged by AI. Here's how to prepare.
Your next job interview will not even give you the dignity of having a human panel assess your competency. It'll just be software algorithm robots that you'll get judged by dispassionately, and they'll spit out some kind of score for you, and they'll decide whether you get a job or not. It's not quite like that just yet, but I don't think we're that far away from it because the article does paint some sobering statistics. How it typically goes is you come in to your interview and this interview room will not have any people in it, or you could be doing it from home remote.
Sure.
You might hear a prompt for a question, which may be narrated to you from a human operator, or it could be a godlike robotic voice that booms in over your headphones.
Or Morgan Freeman.
If they've got the budget for Morgan Freeman, they probably wouldn't be hiring you, right? So to ask you a series of questions, autonomously, robotic-like, you give your responses. You are filmed in some capacity or recorded, certainly your audio, and that's sent through to an AI processing algorithm to weed things out, like obvious miscues, incorrect responses, awkwardness on camera.
And that's hard, isn't it? Because you rely a lot on that face-to-face social cues.
And presumably, the statistics say that it's not 100% of organizations that are using AI in their recruitment process.
Between 20 and 50% of organizations globally.
Some part of the recruitment process.
Yeah.
So if there were 100 people applying for this one position, they might have AI filter out the first round, let's say, right? And that would save the organization a lot of money.
Yeah.
Hopefully for the final round, you speak to a human, but you might not get to that second phase. Blaming TikTok for blaming young people on their phones, ruining technology, ruining everything. The organizations which are run by adults,
Yep, that's right.
we're thinking of co-opting this technology to make it much harder for young people to find work. But let's end on some concrete tips for job interviews, whether they be handled by humans or AI. What is the thing that you would say makes you the most nervous heading to a job interview?
Not being prepared, not feeling prepared, not knowing the answer to a question.
So not knowing the kind of questions they might ask you, and therefore not knowing how to prepare for those questions, feeling really stumped in the middle of the interview, looking dumb.
Yeah, looking dumb. Absolutely.
There's a real quick fix for that. You could Google the most common interview questions that are asked for your job, plug those questions into AI.
Yes.
You could get AI to generate a human sounding response, not reading it out or repeating it, but using it as inspiration. So you've got like an assistant to say, oh, well, this is my response to this question. How can I augment it to accentuate this part of my skill set? You could have a sounding board. I still think it's more effective to workshop this with someone who's a human.
Yes.
So if you had the capacity and the network to do so, you could ask a superior, maybe not your parents is my recommendation, because your parents have a bias. They either think you're too great or they think you're too bad. If you're Asian, odds are your parents think you're a little worse than you maybe really are. Or they like to tell you you're so great to your face. So family members is a little harder. Certainly siblings is a really hard one, right? I don't think siblings can give impartial feedback to their younger or older brothers.
Appropriate level of disdain, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I guess if you want tough medicine, then that would be a good sounding board. But having someone who's got a job in a similar field or a different field, asking them to do mock interviews with you is very, very helpful. But yeah, you could also use AI to help with that.
Yeah.
If it's a online interview, which I've been a part of, both I've been interviewing online, I've sat in panels where we were interviewing people online, that is a completely different ballgame. And what you're nervous about there often shouldn't be the thing that you're nervous about. If you're nervous about not answering a question correctly in an online interview setting, you could just have a device, a set of your practice responses, and you're choosing from the one that you've pre-prepared for, right? So you've got a few options you can go with, and depending on the question, you've already got a few ideas mapped out. Maybe not a fully written out paragraph, because it's pretty obvious if you're reading.
Yes.
But you could have visual aids that the other side can't see, you know? So maybe that fear of not knowing the answer to a question shouldn't be the one that you have. The fear you should have if it's an online interview is not looking into the camera or looking a little weird. So I'm going to look into the camera now. If I was looking just a little bit higher, so I'm going to look above the line of sight with the camera, I'm going to look like this, right? So on camera now, my IQ has dropped roughly 50 points, right? I'm looking like I'm staring into space like a vacant child. Whereas when looking into the camera, it seems like I'm a serious candidate for the position. Line of sight. You don't know what your line of sight looks like until you've recorded yourself on your webcam and see what it looks like. The other one is not as bad, the other direction, but it's not very flattering. If you're looking down the camera like this, and if your webcam's positioned too low, you might be able to hear them better because usually the microphone's like close to the bottom, right?
Yeah.
But if your webcam's pointing up, you've got a double chin.
Not the most flattering.
You look like Jabba the Hutt. So that's more of a vanity one. And if you're applying for a senior management role, then appearance is actually quite important. So you kind of want to position your laptop or your webcam at the line of sight so that it seems like you're talking to them rather than looking like a vacant child, not knowing where to look and or not knowing how to make appropriate eye contact. Some people can't make eye contact for more than like 2 seconds. It would be even worse if I just like looked like this the whole time, didn't want to make eye contact with the computer. It would just look really weird. The other thing is if they can even hear you. Sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't quite catch the last bit. Or even worse, they keep answering the question and they can't hear when we say, okay, that's quite enough. Like, we can move on. I say, oh, that's interesting. Let's move on. So having good audio and good visuals really, really important. You could go really deep down this rabbit hole and say, well, what's the most flattering light for my skin tone? What's the most impressive, Star Wars figurines I could have in my background or something, appropriate.
Depends on the job. Might be appropriate.
But wear the same clothes you would for an in-person job interview, suit and tie, or corporate dress, whatever you want. I think the most important thing is making good eye contact with the camera and having good audio and being able to hear them. Generally speaking, you want to be as close to the microphone as possible. If your microphone is the one built into your computer, you're set up to fail right there, because you're going to be trying to talk really close to your laptop screen. It's going to look weird. Try to invest a few bucks into a microphone that can be positioned further away from your laptop, so then it won't seem so obvious if you're not looking at them. If you're looking in a weird direction, have your audio source a bit further away from your webcam so that you can have this benefit of seeming more professional.
Okay, that's quite enough.
You've talked quite enough, you TikTokery. Have quite enough of your TikTokery this episode, Jack. Getting a question wrong is not the end of the world. It's actually if you respond very badly to a question, or you give the right answer, but you seem a bit defensive, a bit aggressive in your response. Like, how could you ask me that?
Yeah.
That's
be problematic too,
that's way more of a red flag. It's your temperament they're looking for rather than what you're saying a lot of the time.
so.
Especially if they can see what's on paper already, right? They've seen your accomplishments on paper. It's more how you present yourself, isn't it?
I think it goes a long way to being competitive for a job. You would hope it's not the be all and end all, but I think it's more important than you might think in a lot of fields.
If you're a young scientist, a young researcher, or any young person trying to get a job, I really recommend that you try and make videos. Maybe not start a YouTube channel, but making videos is a very humbling process. Watching yourself on camera talk is a very self-defeating, yet reflective and important process.
And this has been a great exercise for me personally as well, I would say.
Being on the podcast, it's been a good exercise for you. You get to wrangle with all your vocal tics. Have we said that's right? A little less? A little less this episode, hopefully 10% less is what we're aiming for.
I think I went longer without saying it this time.
The proof will be in the pudding.
Yes.
That's hopefully a more positive stint on how we can take this forward if you're a young person. Know that technology is on your side simultaneously as well as against you. Know that grown-ups and older organizations will use the technology to their advantage. Try and put your best foot forward. Try and have a 3 to 5 year plan for what you're studying or what you're working on, and focus on the human connection. That is what's going to take you forward into any job setting, any interview setting. It's how you respond to people that will make the difference in the end. That's it for yet another episode of Crossover Connections with Jack Wang. You can find the episodes on YouTube, the full video version, as well as the audio version on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. All the links to all the various versions of the podcast will be in the show notes or the YouTube link as well. My name is Jack. Thanks for listening.
And I'm Amanda.
Hope to connect with you again next time around.